Standing in my champagne-colored dress, surrounded by family and friends at my 30th birthday celebration, I never expected my husband Marcus to destroy my world with a single toast. The crystal glass trembled in his hand as he announced our divorce, publicly humiliating me, while revealing he had been systematically stealing from my family trust fund for 3 years. But what Marcus did not know was that I had discovered his financial crimes 2 weeks earlier. By the time dessert arrived, his empire would crumble. Hey, everyone! Watching. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. If you love dramatic justice stories like this one, smash that like button and subscribe, because this birthday party revelation is about to get absolutely insane. Trust me, you will want to see how this unfolds. 2 weeks before my birthday party, I was organizing our home office when I accidentally knocked over a stack of Marcus's files. Papers scattered across the hardwood floor like fallen leaves, and as I gathered them, one document caught my attention. It was a bank statement from an account I had never seen before, showing deposits that made my stomach drop. The account belonged to Marcus, but the money flowing into it came from sources that looked suspiciously familiar. I recognized the routing numbers from my family's Riverside Trust, the inheritance fund my grandmother had established for me when I turned 25. According to the paperwork, I was supposed to receive quarterly statements and have full access to make withdrawals for approved purposes like education, housing, or business investments. I had trusted Marcus completely when he offered to handle the administrative details of the trust. He worked in financial planning after all, and had convinced me that his expertise would help maximize our returns. For 3 years, I had signed papers without reading them carefully, believing my husband had my best interests at heart. The quarterly statements he showed me always looked reasonable, and I never questioned why the balance seemed to grow slowly despite the substantial initial amount. But these hidden bank statements told a different story entirely. Over 36 months, Marcus had systematically transferred money from my trust into his personal account. The amounts were carefully calculated to avoid triggering automatic alerts, usually ranging between $5,000 and $15,000 per transaction. He had forged my signature on withdrawal authorizations and created fake investment documents to justify the transfers. The total amount stolen was staggering, nearly $400,000 from my inheritance. Money that was supposed to secure our future had been funding his secret lifestyle. I discovered receipts for expensive golf club memberships, luxury car payments, and even a rental property I knew nothing about. Marcus had been living a double life funded entirely by my family's money. My hands shook as I photographed every document with my phone. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Marcus had not just stolen from me. He had betrayed the trust that forms the foundation of marriage. Every time he had kissed me goodnight, every romantic dinner, every anniversary celebration had been built on lies and theft. The cruelest part was discovering how he had manipulated my relationship with my family. For months, Marcus had been telling me that my parents seemed distant and disapproving of our marriage. He suggested that they thought I was irresponsible with money and that they were considering changing the terms of the trust. I had started avoiding family gatherings, feeling ashamed and inadequate. Now I realized this was all part of his strategy to isolate me from the people who might have helped me discover his crimes. I found emails between Marcus and his brother Derek discussing their plan to drain the trust fund completely before divorcing me. They referred to me as the Golden Goose and joked about how naive I was about financial matters. The emails revealed that Marcus had never loved me at all. Our entire relationship had been a calculated scheme to access my family's wealth. In one particularly cruel email, Marcus wrote to Derek about how easy it had been to convince me to sign documents without reading them. He described me as desperate for approval and pathetically trusting. They had planned the whole operation from the beginning, targeting me specifically because of my inheritance and my lack of experience with complex financial arrangements. The most devastating discovery came in a series of text messages between Marcus and a woman named Vanessa. They had been having an affair for over a year, and he had been using my stolen money to fund lavish dates and expensive gifts for her. The messages were explicit and cruel, with Marcus describing me as just a meal ticket and promising Vanessa that he would leave me as soon as he had extracted everything valuable from the marriage. I realized that Marcus had been playing an incredibly sophisticated long game. He had courted me, strategically proposed at exactly the right moment, and spent 3 years systematically looting my inheritance while positioning himself to escape with minimal consequences. The divorce papers I found in his files showed that he planned to claim our marriage was irretrievably broken due to my alleged financial irresponsibility and family dysfunction. But Marcus had made one critical error in his planning. He had underestimated me completely. While he saw a naive young woman who could be easily manipulated and discarded, I was actually the granddaughter of Eleanor Riverside, one of the most formidable businesswomen in our state's history. My grandmother had not built a financial empire by being weak or trusting. She had taught me to be observant, strategic, and ruthlessly protective of family interests. As I sat in our living room, surrounded by evidence of my husband's betrayal, I felt something cold and determined settling in my chest. Marcus wanted to play games with my family's money and my life. He was about to learn that the Riverside women did not go down without a fight. I spent the next 2 weeks carefully documenting everything while pretending that nothing had changed. I smiled at Marcus over breakfast, kissed him goodbye each morning, and acted like the trusting wife he thought he had married. Meanwhile, I was building a case that would destroy him completely. The birthday party he was planning would be the perfect stage for his downfall. Marcus had insisted on hosting it at our house, inviting everyone we knew, including my parents and his business associates. He thought he was setting up the perfect public platform to humiliate me and announce our divorce on his terms. Instead, it would become the night when Marcus learned that stealing from the wrong family has consequences that last forever. The night of my birthday party, I watched Marcus move through our living room like a predator surveying his territory. He had spent weeks planning this evening, convinced that he would emerge victorious while I crumbled under public humiliation. Our house was filled with 60 guests, family members, friends, his business colleagues, and even some of his clients who had become personal acquaintances over the years. Marcus had insisted on giving a toast, claiming he wanted to honor our marriage and my special day. I knew better. This was his moment to announce our divorce and paint himself as the wronged party, leaving me devastated and isolated in front of everyone who mattered to us. He had choreographed this evening to maximize my shame and minimize any potential backlash against him. But Marcus had no idea that I had spent 2 weeks preparing my own performance. I had strategically positioned myself near the fireplace mantel where everyone could see me clearly. My phone was connected to our sound system through Bluetooth, and I had carefully prepared a presentation that would expose every detail of his crimes. The evidence I had gathered was organized into a devastating slideshow that would play on our large television screen at exactly the right moment. When Marcus clinked his champagne glass and called for everyone's attention, my heart raced with anticipation rather than dread. I watched him smile that charming smile that had once made me feel so loved and protected. Now, it just looked predatory and cold. Friends and family. Marcus began, his voice carrying that practiced confidence he used with his financial planning clients. I want to thank you all for celebrating Serafina's 30th birthday with us tonight. This has been an incredible journey, and I have something very important to share with all of you. The room fell silent, everyone expecting romantic words about our marriage. Or perhaps an announcement about starting a family. I saw my parents leaning forward, smiling expectantly. My mother had been hoping for grandchildren, and my father clearly approved of Marcus's apparent success and stability. Marriage is about trust, Marcus continued, and I almost laughed at the irony. It is about building a life together based on honesty, shared values, and mutual respect. Unfortunately, sometimes we discover that the person we married is not who we thought they were. I watched the confusion spreading across our guests' faces as Marcus's tone shifted from celebratory to somber. He was actually going to do it. He was going to publicly humiliate me at my own birthday party, using my family's money to fund this elaborate charade. After much consideration, and with a heavy heart, Marcus said, pausing dramatically, I have to announce that Serafina and I will be divorcing. Her financial irresponsibility and family dysfunction have made it impossible for us to continue building a future together. The gasps from our guests were audible. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, and my father's face darkened with anger. But their anger was not directed at me. It was focused entirely on Marcus. They knew me well enough to recognize that something was very wrong with this narrative. This was my moment. I smiled sweetly at Marcus and began applauding slowly. That was beautiful, darling. Really moving. Now let me give a toast of my own. Marcus's confident expression faltered slightly, but he could not refuse without looking even more cruel and controlling. I picked up my own champagne glass and activated my phone with my other hand. Thank you all for being here tonight, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room. Marcus is absolutely right that marriage is about trust, and he is also right that sometimes we discover our spouse is not who we thought they were. I touched my phone screen and our television came to life, displaying the first slide of my presentation, a bank statement showing Marcus's secret account with nearly $400,000 in deposits from my family trust. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, I would like you to meet the real Marcus Hamilton. Not the successful financial planner you all know, but a sophisticated thief who has been systematically stealing from my inheritance for 3 years. The room erupted in shocked murmurs as the evidence played across the screen. Bank statements, forged signatures, fake investment documents, and email conversations between Marcus and his brother planning their scheme. I had organized everything chronologically, creating a clear narrative of deliberate fraud and betrayal. Marcus's face went white as he realized what was happening. Serafina, stop this immediately. You are making a terrible mistake. The only mistake I made was trusting you, I replied calmly. But fortunately, I learned from my grandmother that when someone steals from the Riverside family, there are always consequences. The presentation continued with the most damaging evidence: the text messages between Marcus and Vanessa, his affair partner. The explicit conversations played on the screen while our guests read his cruel descriptions of me as just a meal ticket and pathetically trusting. The room was completely silent except for the sound of my mother crying and my father's angry muttering. You see, I continued, Marcus has been planning to divorce me all along, but he wanted to steal as much as possible first and then publicly humiliate me to cover his tracks. He thought that if he could convince everyone that I was irresponsible and dysfunctional, no one would question why our marriage failed or investigate the missing money. Marcus tried to leave, but my father and 2 of his friends had positioned themselves near the exits. There was no escape from this room until I finished destroying his reputation completely. The final slides showed the divorce papers Marcus had prepared, complete with his allegations about my supposed financial irresponsibility and family dysfunction. The contrast between his accusations and the documented evidence of his own crimes was devastating and undeniable. So yes, I concluded, raising my champagne glass. Marcus is absolutely right that we will be divorcing. But not because I am irresponsible with money. We are divorcing because he is a thief, a liar, and a fraud who thought he could steal from my family and discard me without consequences. I turned to face Marcus, directly, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper that somehow carried through the silent room. You wanted to end me with a toast. Consider yourself ended. By tomorrow morning, every financial institution in the state will know exactly what kind of man you really are. Your career is over. Your reputation is destroyed, and you will spend the next several years in prison paying for your crimes. The champagne glass slipped from Marcus's hand and shattered on our hardwood floor, just like his carefully constructed life of lies and theft. The silence that followed my revelation lasted exactly 14 seconds before chaos erupted. Marcus stood frozen in the center of our living room, surrounded by 60 witnesses to his complete exposure, while our guests processed the magnitude of his betrayal. The evidence was still playing on the television screen, documenting 3 years of systematic theft and deliberate manipulation. My father was the first to move. As a retired district attorney, he understood immediately that we were looking at multiple felony charges: embezzlement, fraud, forgery, and identity theft. He pulled out his phone and began making calls while my mother wrapped her arms around me, whispering apologies for not recognizing the signs of Marcus's manipulation. "Serafina," she said, her voice shaking with anger and regret. "We thought you were pulling away from us because you wanted independence. We had no idea he was isolating you deliberately." But the most unexpected reaction came from someone I had not anticipated: Jonathan Miles, one of Marcus's own business colleagues. Instead of defending his associate or quietly slipping away from the scandal, Jonathan approached me with a grim expression and urgent news. "Mrs. Hamilton," he said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately. What you have discovered tonight is just the beginning. Marcus has been running similar schemes with other clients, and I have been gathering evidence for months." Jonathan led me to our kitchen while the party dissolved into clusters of shocked conversations. He explained that he had been suspicious of Marcus's unusually high success rate and lavish lifestyle for over a year. As a forensic accountant who specialized in financial fraud investigation, Jonathan recognized patterns that others might miss. "6 months ago," Jonathan continued, "I started receiving complaints from clients about discrepancies in their investment accounts. Small amounts at first, but the pattern was consistent. Marcus was skimming money from multiple accounts and using sophisticated methods to hide the theft. He showed me documents on his phone proving that Marcus had stolen from at least 12 other clients, including elderly retirees who trusted him with their life savings. The total amount exceeded $2 million, making this a federal crime that would trigger FBI investigation and prosecution. I have been working with federal investigators for 3 months, Jonathan revealed, but we needed more evidence to build an airtight case. What you have gathered tonight provides the missing pieces we needed to prove systematic fraud rather than isolated incidents. This information changed everything. My personal betrayal was part of a much larger criminal enterprise, and Marcus's victims included vulnerable people who could not afford to lose their retirement funds or disability settlements. The scope of his crimes was staggering and deeply personal for dozens of families. Jonathan explained that the federal task force had been planning to arrest Marcus within the next 2 weeks, but my public exposure tonight would force them to accelerate their timeline. By exposing him publicly, Jonathan said, you have prevented him from destroying additional evidence or fleeing the jurisdiction, but you have also put yourself in potential danger. As if summoned by his words, Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face twisted with rage and desperation. You stupid, naive little girl, he snarled, dropping all pretense of charm or manipulation. You have no idea what you have just done. Do you think this ends with me? Jonathan stepped protectively in front of me, but Marcus was not finished. My clients include people who do not handle financial losses well. When they discover what you have cost them, they will hold you responsible for disrupting their own schemes. You think you have won? But you have just painted a target on your back. Before anyone could respond, My father entered the kitchen with Detective Sarah Chen from the Financial Crimes Unit. She had been at the party as a family friend, not in any official capacity, but the evidence I had presented required immediate law enforcement intervention. "Marcus Hamilton," Detective Chen announced formally. "You are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft. You have the right to remain silent." Marcus tried to run, but Jonathan and my father blocked his path while Detective Chen called for backup. The surreal nature of watching my husband get arrested at my own birthday party was overwhelming, but I felt a deep satisfaction knowing that justice was finally being served. As Marcus was handcuffed and led away, he turned back to me with pure hatred in his eyes. "This is not over, Serafina. You have made enemies tonight that you cannot handle." Detective Chen stayed to take my statement, while federal agents began processing the crime scene that my living room had become. The party guests gradually departed, but not before several people approached me with information that would strengthen the case against Marcus. His business partner revealed that Marcus had been pressuring her to sign documents she did not understand, using the same manipulation tactics he had used on me. Two of his golf club friends admitted they had always wondered how he afforded such an expensive lifestyle on his declared income. Even his brother Derek's wife contacted Detective Chen to report suspicious financial conversations she had overheard. But the most significant alliance formed that evening came from an unexpected source, Victoria Ashworth, a prominent local attorney who specialized in white-collar crime prosecution. She had been at the party as a friend of my mother's, and she was appalled by the sophistication of Marcus's scheme. "Serafina," Victoria said, "I want to represent you personally, and I also want to help organize a class action lawsuit for Marcus's other victims. What he has done is not just theft, it is systematic financial abuse that has destroyed people's lives and retirement security." Victoria explained that by working together, Marcus's victims could recover more of their stolen money and ensure that he faced the maximum possible consequences for his crimes. She had connections with federal prosecutors and experience with complex fraud cases that could help expedite the investigation and trial process. Over the next few hours, as crime scene technicians photographed evidence and federal agents interviewed witnesses, I realized that my birthday party had become the catalyst for something much larger than personal revenge. We were building a coalition of victims and allies who would ensure that Marcus faced justice for every crime he had committed. The most powerful moment came when Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, an 82-year-old widow, called Detective Chen after hearing about the arrest on the local news. Marcus had stolen her late husband's entire pension fund, telling her that the money was being invested in secure government bonds. She had been living on Social Security for 6 months, believing that her investments were simply performing poorly. "I knew something was wrong," Mrs. Patterson said through tears. "But I trusted him because he seemed so professional and caring. He told me that questioning his decisions showed a lack of faith in his expertise." By midnight, we had identified 18 victims of Marcus's schemes, representing over $3 million in stolen funds. The FBI Financial Crimes Task Force was coordinating with local prosecutors to ensure that federal and state charges would run consecutively rather than concurrently, guaranteeing Marcus would spend decades in prison. But even as we celebrated these victories, Jonathan's warning about potential retaliation nagged at me. Marcus's threats suggested that he had been working with other criminals who might view my actions as a threat to their own operations. The investigation was just beginning, and I suspected that my 30th birthday party had started something that would change many lives beyond my own. As the last law enforcement officers left our house at 3 a.m, I stood in my champagne-colored dress, surrounded by scattered champagne glasses and evidence tags, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and revelations. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again, strong, determined, and ready to fight for justice, no matter what the cost. 3 weeks after Marcus's arrest, I thought the worst was behind us. The federal investigation was progressing smoothly, with 18 confirmed victims and evidence mounting daily. Victoria Ashworth had organized our victim advocacy group and Jonathan Miles was working closely with FBI forensic accountants to trace every stolen dollar. The media attention had been overwhelming but largely supportive, portraying Marcus as a sophisticated predator who targeted trusting families. Then Jonathan called me with news that shattered my growing confidence. "Serafina, we have a serious problem," he said, his voice tight with stress. "Someone has been leaking information about our investigation to Marcus's legal team. They know details that should be confidential, and they are using that information to challenge evidence and delay proceedings." My stomach dropped as the implications became clear. One of our trusted allies was secretly working against us, feeding sensitive information to the enemy. The betrayal felt almost as devastating as Marcus's original crimes because this time I had been careful about trust and verification. "How do you know?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Yesterday's FBI raid on Marcus's storage unit came up empty," Jonathan explained. "Someone warned him to move the evidence. The unit had been cleaned out within hours of our planning meeting. Only 6 people knew about that raid location and timing. The 6 people included me, Jonathan, Detective Chen, Victoria, FBI, Agent Martinez, and Federal Prosecutor David Sterling. One of these people I had learned to trust and depend on was actually working for Marcus, undermining everything we had built together." The leak became more obvious over the following days. Legal motions that should have surprised Marcus's defense team were anticipated and countered immediately. Witness interviews were compromised because Marcus's lawyers knew exactly what questions would be asked and had coached their client accordingly. Evidence we thought was secure was being challenged through procedural technicalities that suggested inside knowledge of our investigative strategy. The most devastating blow came when Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, our most sympathetic victim, suddenly recanted her testimony. The 82-year-old widow who had lost her husband's pension fund to Marcus's scheme called Victoria's office to announce that she no longer wanted to participate in the prosecution. She sounded terrified, Victoria told me after the call. Mrs. Patterson said she had been mistaken about the transactions and that Marcus had actually helped her avoid larger losses. Someone got to her, Serafina. This level of witness intimidation requires resources and connections that Marcus should not have access to from jail. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Marcus's threats about making enemies who would hold me responsible were coming true. Someone with significant power and influence was protecting him, and they were systematically destroying our case from within. The betrayal was revealed in the most painful way possible. During what I thought was a routine strategy meeting at Victoria's law office, Federal Prosecutor David Sterling received a phone call that changed everything. His face went white as he listened, and when he hung up, his expression was grim. "We have identified our leak," David announced. "Agent Martinez has been feeding information to Marcus's defense team for 3 weeks. She was arrested an hour ago at her home where investigators found evidence of payments totaling $50,000 from an offshore account linked to Marcus's criminal network." Agent Martinez had been the federal investigator I trusted most. She had seemed genuinely outraged by Marcus's crimes and personally invested in securing justice for his victims. I had shared details about my emotional recovery and family relationships with her, believing she understood the human cost of financial fraud. Learning that she had been bought and paid for felt like being betrayed all over again. "It gets worse," David continued. "Agent Martinez had access to our entire witness list and evidence inventory. She has been systematically compromising every aspect of our prosecution strategy. 3 more witnesses have been intimidated into silence, and key financial evidence has been ruled inadmissible due to procedural violations that Martinez helped orchestrate." The scope of the sabotage was staggering. Marcus's defense team now had intimate knowledge of our prosecution strategy, witness testimony, and evidence chain. They were filing motions to dismiss charges based on information that Martinez had provided about investigative procedures and evidence collection methods. Victoria looked devastated as she explained the legal implications. With Agent Martinez's betrayal exposed, Marcus's lawyers are arguing that the entire investigation has been compromised. They are requesting that all evidence collected during her involvement be excluded from trial proceedings. If successful, this could reduce the charges from federal felonies to minor state violations. The possibility of Marcus escaping serious consequences because of Martinez's betrayal was unbearable. Everything we had worked for, every hour spent building the case against him, every testimony from his victims could be thrown out because one corrupt agent had decided that money was more important than justice. But the worst revelation came when David showed us intercepted communications between Martinez and her handlers. The corrupt network protecting Marcus was much larger than we had imagined. They had been systematically targeting financial fraud investigators and prosecutors for years, building a protective shield around white-collar criminals who paid for their services. Marcus is not just a thief, David explained. He is part of an organized criminal enterprise that specializes in financial fraud and witness intimidation. Agent Martinez was recruited specifically to protect their operations from federal prosecution. The $50,000 she received was just the initial payment for compromising our investigation. This meant that everything I had endured was part of a larger pattern of corruption and criminal conspiracy. Marcus had never been working alone, and his confidence about escaping consequences came from knowing that powerful people were protecting him. The birthday party confrontation that had felt like victory was actually just the first move in a much more dangerous game. As we left Victoria's office that afternoon, I felt more defeated than I had since discovering Marcus's original betrayal. The justice system I had trusted to protect victims and punish criminals was itself compromised by corruption and criminal influence. Marcus's threats about making enemies were proving prophetic, and I began to wonder if fighting back had been a terrible mistake. The leaked investigation had also put my family in real danger. David warned us that the criminal network protecting Marcus had resources for intimidation and retaliation that extended far beyond legal maneuvering. They were playing for stakes that included personal safety and family security, not just money and reputation. That night, as I sat in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, surrounded by security measures that federal marshals had recommended, I realized that exposing Marcus had started something that could destroy everything I cared about. The betrayal within our own team had shifted the balance of power dramatically, and I was no longer sure that truth and evidence would be enough to secure justice. The morning after Agent Martinez's betrayal was exposed, I woke up feeling more determined than defeated. Yes, we had lost a crucial ally and suffered serious setbacks. But Marcus's criminal network had made one critical error. They had underestimated the power of genuine justice-seeking people who refused to be intimidated. My grandmother, Eleanor Riverside, had always taught me that when powerful people try to silence you, it means you are getting close to something they desperately want to hide. The fact that Marcus's protectors had spent $50,000 to corrupt a federal agent proved that our investigation was threatening their entire operation. Victoria called me at 7 in the morning with news that would change everything. Serafina, we have received an unexpected ally who could reverse our entire situation. Someone with intimate knowledge of the criminal network protecting Marcus wants to meet with us today. The ally turned out to be Rebecca Martinez, Agent Martinez's own sister, who worked as a forensic computer analyst for the Department of Treasury. Rebecca had been investigating financial corruption independently for months, following digital traces of money laundering and offshore banking that led directly to Marcus's criminal network. My sister made the worst decision of her life, Rebecca told us during our clandestine meeting at a downtown coffee shop. But her betrayal has given me access to information that we can use to destroy the entire criminal organization protecting your husband. Rebecca explained that Agent Martinez had been keeping detailed records of her communications with the criminal network, partly as insurance and partly out of habit as a trained investigator. When she was arrested, investigators had seized her encrypted devices, but Rebecca had legal access to backup files that her sister had stored on their shared family cloud account. "The evidence in these files goes far beyond your husband's case," Rebecca revealed, showing us encrypted documents on her laptop. "This criminal network has been protecting white-collar criminals for over a decade, corrupting investigators, intimidating witnesses, and laundering money through a sophisticated system of offshore accounts and shell corporations." The files contained names, dates, financial transactions, and communication records that documented systematic corruption reaching into multiple federal agencies, state prosecutors' offices, and private law firms. Marcus was just one client in a much larger criminal enterprise that had been operating with impunity for years. But the most devastating evidence came in the form of recorded phone conversations between the criminal network's leaders and their corrupt contacts in law enforcement. Rebecca had accessed voice files that her sister had recorded as insurance, documenting explicit discussions about witness intimidation, evidence destruction, and prosecution sabotage. "Listen to this," Rebecca said, playing a conversation between her sister and someone identified as Thomas Brennan, apparently the network's coordinator. The recording was crystal clear, Brennan instructing Agent Martinez to compromise specific evidence and coaching her on how to manipulate witness statements without leaving traceable fingerprints. Victoria's eyes widened as she listened. "This is conspiracy to obstruct justice, witness tampering, and corruption of federal investigations. These recordings alone could bring down 20 people and lead to hundreds of overturned convictions." But Rebecca had even more powerful ammunition. Her Treasury Department access had allowed her to trace the financial flows funding this criminal network back to their ultimate sources. The money came from a consortium of wealthy individuals who had been purchasing protection from prosecution for various white-collar crimes. "Your husband's case was just one small piece of their operation," Rebecca explained. "But your public exposure of him has created a crisis for the entire network. They are scrambling to contain the damage which has made them sloppy and more vulnerable than they have ever been." The evidence Rebecca provided was comprehensive and irrefutable. Financial records showing payments from protected criminals to corrupt agents, communication logs documenting specific acts of obstruction and witness intimidation, and organizational charts identifying key players throughout the criminal network. Most importantly, Rebecca had discovered that the network's protection was not unlimited. They had been successful for years because they operated in shadows, corrupting individual cases without attracting systematic attention. My public exposure of Marcus had forced them into the open, creating federal attention that they could not easily deflect or control. "The FBI director has been briefed about the scope of this corruption," Rebecca told us. "A joint task force, including Treasury Justice Department and independent prosecutors, has been assembled to investigate the entire network. Your husband's case has become the catalyst for the largest federal corruption investigation in 20 years. This information transformed our legal strategy completely. Instead of fighting defensive battles against corrupted evidence and intimidated witnesses, we could now go on the offensive with evidence that would destroy Marcus's protection network entirely." Victoria immediately contacted federal prosecutor David Sterling to share Rebecca's evidence. Within hours, new federal charges were filed against Marcus and 12 members of his protection network, including conspiracy, racketeering, and organized criminal activity under federal RICO statutes. The most satisfying moment came when we learned that Thomas Brennan, the network coordinator, had been arrested during a recorded meeting where he was attempting to bribe another federal agent. Rebecca's evidence had allowed investigators to set up a sting operation that captured him in the act of corruption, eliminating any possibility of claiming innocence or entrapment. But Rebecca's most important contribution was personal rather than legal. She had uncovered the specific threats that had been made against me and my family, along with detailed plans for retaliation that the criminal network had developed. Armed with this knowledge, federal marshals could provide targeted protection and take preemptive action against potential attackers. "They plan to destroy your reputation through manufactured scandals," Rebecca explained, showing us drafted press releases and fake evidence that had been prepared to discredit my testimony. They also discussed more direct forms of intimidation, including targeting your parents and attempting to frame you for financial crimes. Knowing about these planned attacks allowed us to prepare effective countermeasures. Victoria worked with federal prosecutors to obtain court orders protecting all witnesses and their families from retaliation. Media contacts who had been supporting our cause were briefed about potential disinformation campaigns designed to discredit the investigation. The psychological impact of having a powerful ally like Rebecca was immeasurable. For weeks, I had felt isolated and vulnerable, fighting against enemies with seemingly unlimited resources and influence. Now, I had access to insider knowledge and federal protection that leveled the playing field dramatically. As we prepared for the expanded prosecution that would target the entire criminal network, I realized that my birthday party confrontation with Marcus had accomplished something far greater than personal justice. We had exposed a system of corruption that had been protecting criminals and perverting justice for years, creating an opportunity to reform and strengthen the institutions meant to protect honest people from sophisticated fraud. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since discovering Marcus's betrayal, I felt confident that truth and justice would ultimately prevail over corruption and criminal conspiracy. 6 months after my 30th birthday party, I stood in federal court, watching Marcus Hamilton receive a sentence that exceeded our most optimistic expectations. Judge Patricia Wells announced 42 years in federal prison, without possibility of parole, followed by restitution payments that would consume any assets Marcus might ever acquire for the rest of his life. The courtroom was packed with his victims, federal agents, prosecutors, and journalists, covering what had become known as the Hamilton financial conspiracy case. Marcus, wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles, looked nothing like the confident manipulator who had tried to humiliate me 6 months earlier. The criminal network that had protected him had been systematically dismantled, leaving him completely isolated and defenseless. "Mr. Hamilton," Judge Wells said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority, "your crimes represent a profound betrayal of trust that has destroyed families, bankrupted retirees, and corrupted the institutions meant to protect honest citizens. The evidence shows that you are a sophisticated predator who specifically targeted vulnerable people for financial exploitation." The prosecution had ultimately identified 37 victims across 5 states, representing over $4 million in stolen funds. Marcus's criminal network had included corrupt federal agents, state prosecutors, private investigators, and money laundering specialists who had been protecting white-collar criminals for over a decade. Thomas Brennan, the network coordinator, had received 60 years in federal prison. Agent Martinez got 25 years plus forfeiture of all assets acquired through corruption. 12 other conspirators received sentences ranging from 8 to 35 years, effectively destroying the criminal organization that had made Marcus believe he was untouchable. But the most satisfying aspect of the legal resolution was the restitution process. Federal investigators had recovered nearly 90% of the stolen money through asset forfeiture, offshore account seizures, and recovery of hidden properties. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, the elderly widow who had lost her husband's pension fund, received full compensation plus interest and damages for the emotional distress Marcus had caused. The recovery process had revealed the true scope of Marcus's greed and deception. He had purchased 3 luxury cars, a boat, 2 rental properties, and expensive jewelry for his affair partner Vanessa, all using money stolen from trusting clients and my family inheritance. Watching federal marshals auction off these ill-gotten assets to compensate his victims provided a deep sense of justice and closure. Vanessa herself had been charged as an accessory after investigators proved she knew the money funding their relationship came from criminal activity. Her text messages expressing excitement about bleeding the rich clients dry had been particularly damaging to her claims of innocence. She received 5 years in federal prison plus restitution payments that would follow her for decades. The personal healing process had been just as important as the legal victory. My relationship with my parents had been completely restored once they understood how Marcus had systematically isolated me from family support. My mother apologized repeatedly for not recognizing the signs of financial abuse, and my father expressed pride in my courage to fight back against such sophisticated criminals. "Your grandmother Eleanor would have been so proud," my father said after the sentencing hearing. "You showed the same strength and determination that built our family's reputation for integrity and justice." The media attention had been overwhelming, but largely positive. My story had inspired other victims of financial fraud to come forward with their own experiences, leading to additional prosecutions and recovery efforts. Victoria Ashworth had established a victim advocacy foundation that provided legal and emotional support for people targeted by sophisticated financial predators. Most importantly, I had discovered a new purpose and career direction. Rebecca Martinez had offered me a position with the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Investigation Unit, where I could help protect other families from the kind of betrayal I had experienced. The combination of personal experience and grandmother's business training made me uniquely qualified to identify and investigate complex financial fraud schemes. But the deepest transformation had been personal and emotional. The chosen family I had built through this crisis was stronger and more authentic than any relationship I had ever experienced. Victoria had become like an older sister, providing legal guidance and emotional support through every stage of the recovery process. Jonathan Miles had evolved from business colleague to trusted friend who understood the complexities of financial crime and victim psychology. Rebecca Martinez had become my closest confidant, someone who understood both the professional challenges of investigating corruption and the personal trauma of family betrayal. Detective Sarah Chen had remained involved throughout the prosecution, offering practical advice about safety and security that extended far beyond the immediate legal case. Even former strangers had become important parts of my support network. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson and I had developed a grandmother-granddaughter relationship that filled emotional needs for both of us. Other victims from Marcus's schemes had formed a tight-knit community of people committed to supporting each other through recovery and healing. The most unexpected blessing had come through my work with the Victim Advocacy Foundation. Helping other people navigate the aftermath of financial fraud had given my experience meaning and purpose that transformed trauma into strength. Every family we helped recover from financial abuse validated the decision to fight back against Marcus and his criminal network. As I left the federal courthouse after Marcus's sentencing, surrounded by the people who had helped me transform betrayal into justice, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that devastating birthday party. The naive young woman who had trusted blindly and signed documents without reading them had evolved into someone who understood that true strength comes from protecting others who cannot protect themselves. Marcus had tried to destroy me with public humiliation and financial theft, but his betrayal had actually revealed capabilities and connections I never knew I possessed. The revenge he had feared was not petty or vindictive, but rather the systematic application of justice through legal institutions that function properly when honest people refuse to be intimidated. 6 months later, I had recovered financially, professionally, and emotionally from his crimes. Meanwhile, Marcus would spend the rest of his productive life in federal prison, surrounded by other inmates who had little sympathy for someone who stole from elderly widows and trusting families. The final irony was that Marcus's attempts to isolate me from my family had actually strengthened those relationships beyond anything I had ever experienced. His efforts to make me dependent and vulnerable had instead taught me to be independent and strong. His plan to steal my inheritance and leave me with nothing had resulted in my building wealth and security that no one could ever take away. Standing outside the courthouse, surrounded by genuine friends and family who had proven their loyalty through crisis, I realized that the best revenge against someone who tries to destroy your life is simply living well, helping others, and ensuring that justice prevails over corruption and cruelty. Have you ever experienced betrayal that felt like it would destroy everything you believed about trust and family? I learned that sometimes the people who hurt us most actually give us opportunities to discover strength we never knew we had. Well, what's your story of turning betrayal into something positive? Drop your experiences in the comments below because I would love to hear how you found justice and healing after being betrayed by someone you trusted. If this story inspired you or reminded you that fighting back against corruption is always worth it, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life justice stories. Share this with anyone who needs to remember that karma always comes around and that speaking truth to power can change everything. Thank you all for supporting my journey from victim to advocate, and remember that no matter how powerful your enemies seem, honesty and courage will always triumph over lies and corruption in the end.